as long as it's forward. God, send me anywhere, only go with me. Lay any burden on me, only sustain me. And sever any tie in my heart, except the tie that binds my heart to yours. If you have men who will only come if they know there is a good road, I don't want them. I want men who will come if there is no road at all. I will go anywhere, provided it be forward. David Livingstone, 1813 to 1873.
Thank you. And that's for our year of irreversibility, Eyes to the Stars. And from this idea of moving forward, I think we have a theme for the week that really corresponds with that very well, from the unreal to the real. And so before I introduce John, could you please put on the reading you'd like us to look at, John, while Renée reads it aloud?
Yes. Having taken as a bow the great weapon of the secret teaching, one should fix in it the arrow sharpened by constant meditation. Drawing it with a mind filled with that, Brahman penetrate. O bright youth, that immutable mark. The pranava, Om, is the bow. The arrow is the self. Brahman is said to be the mark. With evilness, it is to be penetrated. Become one with it, has the arrow in the mark. Mundaka Upanishad.
Okay. Thank you. Was that Sharon who read that? Yes, thank you very much, Sharon. Lovely reading. So before I start, I'd like to let everyone know that I have three basic sources for what I have to say tonight. The first one, of course, is The Crest Jewel of Wisdom by Adi Shankara. And I consulted the translation by Charles Johnston, which I think is the best of all of them. And I also found the essay on The Crest Jewel by Raghavan Iyer from Hermes to be really invaluable, just to give a really good perspective on Shankara's teachings. And then surprisingly and delightfully, I found Helen Valborg's essay on Aries to be a really good source too. There are several paragraphs that were really quite valuable and from which I've quoted. So we'll begin with that. I think all of you here are probably rather well acquainted with Eastern philosophy and religion, and the idea that there is one ultimate unconditioned reality out of which the entire universe emerges. This idea is found in the Bhagavad Gita and in the Advaita Vedanta writings. The Sanskrit word for that ultimate reality is Brahman, and there's much said in Eastern philosophy and religion about the nature of Brahman. But for the clearest statement of the nature of ultimate reality, we can profitably consult the Indian sage Adi Shankara, also known as Sri Shankaracharya, on this question, as his work, the Viveka Chudamani, or the Crest Jewel of Wisdom, dwells almost exclusively on this theme. The nature of the real and the unreal, and the spiritual path from the unreal to the real. Excuse me. Now, Brahman, as we know, is a totally unconditioned reality. It's said to be boundless and changeless. It has no limits in either space or time, as it is beyond and prior to both, and it has no attributes. It's said to be the source of all that is, but it is also continuously present in everything. It is transcendent, but it is also immanent. We can imagine that there is one universal stream of consciousness which at its source is unconditioned and is beyond all forms and all qualities and beyond every finite locus in space-time. That is, it's not limited by any of its manifestations. And it is the source of this universe and all possible universes. It's the source of that, what's called the plenum, which constitutes the vast fields of spiritual beings of all grades of intelligence and wisdom, and all differentiations and states of substance or matter. In short, it is the source of the cosmos and everything in it. And we know that besides the ultimate Brahman, Indian philosophy posits what's called the universal soul, the universal spirit, Atman. And Shankaracharya's teachings emphasize the unity of Brahman and Atman. And he posits that the ultimate reality, Brahman, is indistinguishable from the universal spirit, or Atman. This non-dualistic philosophy underscores the idea that the highest self of all is ultimately identical with the universal source of existence, the ultimate reality. So in this talk, we will therefore use the term Brahman interchangeably with Atman, for what we have to say of the one could be said with equal validity of the other. As we said, in Shankara's philosophy, everything that constitutes the universe arises from Brahman. And from this, one might suppose that given this vast universe, that perhaps the most insignificant actions of beings don't really matter, that their insignificance somehow exempts them from the notice of the laws of the cosmos. Now, this would be a serious mistake, for within this immense stream of consciousness that encompasses all beings, everything counts, everything. The actions of every being are significant, and every being has a role to play in the vast scheme of the cosmos. Every thought, every act of will, every emotion or image generated or entertained, every word, true or false, everything counts. Now, if there were no world, there obviously would be no objects of experience. And although the world as it is experienced is not ultimately real, neither is it abhava, non-existent, nor shunya, void. So everything in the manifested world is illusory, Shankara teaches, to some extent. But everything is also relatively real. Everything in this world points beyond itself to the absolute, immutable, self-identical Brahman, which is absolute being, or Sat in Sanskrit. For Shankara, the noumenal world is the world of reality. And when a person realizes its true nature, and thereby gains wisdom, he will realize that he is the Atman and that Atman is Brahman. Now, Shankara holds that Brahman cannot be conceptualized by the finite mind, but he also claims that it may be experienced by man in his higher principles. This is very important to remember, as we tend to think that because it is absolute reality, that Brahman is somehow inaccessible to the consciousness of man. But that's not the case, according to Shankara. He speaks of those who know Brahman. They are perfected men, masters of meditation, called Mahatmas. In reference to this sacred idea, Professor Raghavan Iyer points out that, quote, there is nothing in our upbringing that prepares us for an encounter with such an idea. There is nothing in the limiting language of common conversation and trivial talk that can sufficiently prepare one for the grandeur of the idea that such human beings exist, much less the thought that it is within the realm of possibility that we might be capable of the authentic joy of comradeship with the mightiest men of meditation, unquote. And this statement is from Professor Iyer's essay on thoughtfulness. In thinking of these exalted ideas, we encounter the difficult problem of formulating the aim for our spiritual endeavors. The passage read at the beginning of our meeting tells us that the aim of spiritual striving must be nothing less than Brahman. Brahman is that single, universal, and unconditioned stream of consciousness in the universe, both beyond and prior to all forms, as well as reflected in all forms and all particularized units of consciousness. Because of this, that Brahman is reflected by everything in manifestation. Every act that we perform can have the aim of union with Brahman. If Brahman or the Logos is present in every conceivable part of manifestation, it must potentially be present in every activity, such as bathing or cooking, sending a friend a message. In every single activity of human life, we are told, the Logos is present. Brahman could not be in everything if each single thing did not appropriately mirror Brahman. The Upanishad teaches that our aim should be the transcendental Brahman, and that is present in each moment of time, as well as in every act, at each point of space, and in every thought. So what is it that obscures the aim of the spiritually striving human being? What is it that inhibits our growth towards a greater realization of Brahman or Atman? What is it that prevents us from becoming totally one with and remaining constantly attuned to the divine self? Well, it is because we have over many lives engendered an illusory sense of self through actions which have limited specific aims, and that they exclude consideration of larger circles like the rest of the world and the universe. They exclude consideration of the highest reality, and the result is that we are left with a very limited self-identification. Through limiting the aims of our actions to very narrow goals that only satisfy very narrow desires, we end up identifying with our name, our physical form, our self-image, our collection of personal memories, our personal habits, our predilections and prejudices, and ill-digested thoughts about the meaning of our lives and why we are here in incarnation. Professor Iyer says that as if dealing with such a false self-identification were not difficult enough, quote, we have also developed an irreverent attitude to our vestures, an attitude brought over from previous lives. These are the residues of failures from former times when we had the opportunity to strengthen and perfect the spiritual will for the sake of universal good, unquote. So this brings us to the subject of our ignorance of the real. So how did that happen? Well, the author of the essay on Aries in the journal Hermes, Helen Valborg, which was the basis of the talk at ULT San Diego this evening, makes a very profound statement on this subject. Quote, The fundamental privation of knowledge brought about by Maya at the beginning of an evolutionary cycle is the cause of avidya, ignorance, and the uninterrupted practice of the awareness of the real is the means of dispersion of avidya. Discrimination between the real and the unreal is possible only when we have experienced reality. The individual must begin by searching within himself for the spark of the reflected ray of the real. Once he has discovered it, he must tenaciously cling to its light, ever realigning his consciousness to it. Only in this way can avidya be destroyed and rebirth into the cycle of Aries be assumed as a purposeful act of the higher will, unquote. And in that same essay, Professor Valborg goes on to describe the effects of succumbing to avidya. She says, quote, avidya is the first of the 12 nidanas of Buddhism and represents the loss of awareness of one's real nature. Corresponding to Aries, it is the first in a series of causes which bind the soul to the wheel of existence through that sense of ignorance which relates to spiritual awareness. It implies nescience, and though the transcendent can have no opposite, avidya is truly the antithesis of bodhi or enlightenment. It is, however, positive as well as negative, in that it involves wrong views or Platonic double ignorance. The individual immersed in avidya views the phenomenal as noumenal and the noumenal not at all. He does the same with the conditioned and unconditioned, as well as the painful and pleasant. There is a confusion and inversion whereby the non-eternal, impure, and evil are taken to be the eternal, pure, and good, unquote. The last sentence is very much like how Shankara would describe avidya. Professor Valborg's statement that the uninterrupted practice of the awareness of the real is the means of dispersion of avidya is exactly what Shankara taught in the Crest Jewel of Wisdom. So here we'll turn to the wisdom of the Crest Jewel to see what Shankaracharya has to say that might help us understand the crucial issues we encounter in trying to discern the real self from the illusory self. In the Crest Jewel, Shankara says there are 3 things that are hard for human beings to do. Number 1, he says, it is hard to win human stature. Now, this probably sounds a bit odd to most of us as we take it for granted that we are in this human body, that somehow we're entitled to be on this planet in this body. But that really would be a very dangerous assumption, as nature gives no guarantees that we will be allowed to continue to inhabit a human form. Number 2, he says, it is hard to attain true manhood, by which he means, I think, the status of man thinking. Having gained the status as a thinking being is an achievement that only those in a human form may attain to. But to keep that status, we have to use the faculties that we have been provided, that have been provided to us by the gods and the teachers. And number 3, he says it is hard to gain access to the true teachings and their teachers. He says, he who does not strive for liberation in the divine self is deluded in their heart, that they are destroying themselves by grasping at the unreal. He asks, who could be more full of folly than someone who follows selfish purposes after gaining a human body and manhood, which are so difficult to achieve? He says that even though they recite the scriptures and sacrifice to the gods and fulfill all works and worship the divinities, without awakening to the unity of the divine self, liberation is not attained even in 100 eons. This last point is echoed by a statement from the well-known theosophist Bhavani Shankar in the following, quote, "Devotion is the insatiable thirst of the human spirit for the divine, a thirst that can never be satisfied either by the reading of scriptures or the performance of rites or ceremonies. It can be satisfied by individual experience alone." It seems that many of us who have incarnated in this age of inversion simply do not understand what a great privilege it is to be in a human form, to have attained to manhood, to be a manasa, a self-reflective thinking being, to have access to the sacred teachings and the teachers, and then not to avail ourselves of the opportunity. We do not understand that such a privilege, unless reinforced and deserved by acting in obedience to the eternal law of harmony for the benefit of all, can easily be lost. Now, in the crest jewel, Shankara begins by saying that just as in our dreams, the imagined space and time and objects and perceiver are all unreal, so also here in our waking life, the world is conjured up by our unwisdom, since this body, its powers and life breath, and the thought of it as I are all unreal. And here, he invokes that ancient mantra from the Upanishads, Tat Tvam Asi, that thou art. That thou art, he says, the eternal, full of peace, pure, undivided, supreme. And what does Shankara have to say about the nature of the eternal? He says it cannot be attained by any speech, yet it is attained by the pure vision of illumination, that the real, the eternal, is a realm of pure consciousness and beginningless substance. He says the eternal shines alone beyond the very highest that one can reach in consciousness, that it is of a single essence and of the character of the Supreme Self, that it is wisdom, it is endless, it is everlasting. And he repeats, that thou art, bring it to consciousness in thyself. From Bondage to the Body, a chapter in the Crest Jewel, Shankara points to our self-attribution to the body and the image of ourselves as personal, separate beings. And he says this is a falsehood. And he turns us rather in the direction of recognizing as our own self, quote, that partless wisdom which is unaltered by past, present, or future, unquote. He tells us to negate our self-identification with race, family, name, form, stage of life, all of which rest on this vesture of decay, the body, that we must abandon the delusion that we are the actor and the experiencer in the world and affirm our real being as partless bliss. He notes that yes, there are other things that contribute to the bondage of man to the cycle of birth and death, but the principal root cause of them all is the notion that we are this personal self, which first arises in consciousness, and it is there where that false notion must be negated. As long as we're held in mental bondage to that false identification, there can be no element of liberation, which is the very opposite of the lower self. When we have freed ourselves from the eclipsing demon of the lower self, as he calls it, the true self is realized as the eternal, which is being and bliss, self-luminous, and free from all bondage. Finally, Shankara takes up the nature of the true self. He says that we must seek the real self within thyself without a moment's loss, by alertness, by negating the force of worldly opinions, by constant striving. He says we are to, quote, merge thyself in the higher self, that by losing the sense of separation, enter ever into silence, causing the thought of I built up in the body to merge in the real self, which is pure consciousness, being, and bliss, putting off the limitation of form, become ever one with the absolute eternal, unquote. To move towards this state, we must learn to take the perspective of the self with whom we seek union. As that passage from the Upanishad with which we began says, the pranava, Om, is the bow, the arrow is the self, Brahman is said to be the mark. With heedfulness, it is to be penetrated, become one with it. Shankara says that the self, who is unchanging, is alone capable of being the knower of all things that change. Quote, the unreality of things that change and of their changes is clearly seen again and again in thoughts and dreams and in deep sleep, unquote. He exhorts the aspirant to cease to follow the way of the world, cease to follow the way of the body, cease to follow the way of tradition, set thyself assiduously to follow the divine self. So we will conclude our talk with this passage from an essay on the crest jewel by Professor Iyer, who says, quote, the crest jewel could be in your hands. Use it, Shankara says, because by use, you make it sufficiently your own to recognize that the greatest lies are I and thou. Your sphere becomes luminous when you wholly adopt the standpoint of the logos in the cosmos, God and man, and then enjoy the universe through every pair of eyes. Heal yourself and others through yourself by luminous thoughts and adamantine compassion, unquote. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh,
Oops. How about now? I'm audible?
oh, here, let me,
Okay. All right.
okay. Have I stopped sharing now?
You have.
Okay, thank you.
And we got to see that the crest jewel of wisdom could be in our own hands right now, and that we should enjoy the universe through every pair of eyes. Those are two quotes that I got from the final reading of yours, which were really stunning, because you said a couple times that the way to get out of ignorance, of avidya, or the unreal, is by embracing the real. Well, like, what does that mean, to embrace the real? How do we do that? And then I just thought both of those things, well, especially one, the enjoy the universe through every pair of eyes, just really meaning that we could look at things from every perspective and everyone's perspective. So it very much goes to the heart as well as the mind, and using that supreme power of the imagination to really expand one's vision of what the universe really is and who we really are. And maybe that's something about what it means to go from the unreal to the real. It was a beautiful talk. Does somebody want to ask a question? I just want to thank you to begin with.
I would say thank you, Renee, for pointing out that, and thank you, John, for repeating that passage, because it was the one that really stuck with me through the talk about the cessation of avidya. I wonder if you might take a deeper dive into that one. When you first said it, I thought, oh, I need to hear that again, and then you did.
So, can you translate avidya for us again, John?
Yes, avidya actually means a particular form of ignorance. It's ignorance of the real. It's a lack of awareness of that there is such an ultimate reality that is the ground of being and which is the source of all, and to which all are going to return, are in the process of returning to. So that's, and then the dispersion of avidya, as Professor Valborg says in that statement about, where she says, the uninterrupted practice of the awareness of the real is the means of dispersion of avidya. And what that means is exactly what the opening statement from the Upanishad spoke about when it said, the pranava, the om, is the bow, the arrow is the self, Brahman is said to be the mark. With heedfulness, it is to be penetrated, become one with it as the arrow in the mark. So this is, so to speak, the karma yoga of the Bhagavad Gita, of constantly keeping the highest end in view that we can formulate. That is, for example, say the spiritual welfare of other beings as being the object of what we're doing, whatever we're doing, whether we're washing dishes or we're at work doing whatever work we've been given to do or we have to do, or even if we're just relaxing or, doing sports, recreation, whatever it is. Everything can be subsumed under this uninterrupted practice of the awareness of the real. And this is what gradually disperses avidya, which is the ignorance of the immanence, of the universal immanence of the divine unity throughout all the universe, that's what this universe is. It is the outer garment, so to speak, of the divine reality. I'll stop there.
Renee.
What about Maya? I know avidya and Maya are pretty close together, but it's like the relationship's still not, clear to me. One is ignorance, the other one is illusion, but can you talk a little bit more about Maya?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. And it's good that you brought it up because that is actually mentioned in Professor Valborg's statement that I was reading from. She begins that paragraph by saying, by noting the fundamental privation of knowledge brought about by Maya at the beginning of an evolutionary cycle is the cause of avidya. So we have this idea of Maya, and Maya is sometimes spoken of, depends on who's defining it, describing it. Gandhi described it as the glamour of the world, the external world, the world of the social, where all social events take place, of politics, the fields of action, of education, of work, of civilization, that all of it is permeated by a certain Maya, a certain illusion, and it has this kind of glamour to it, as this attractiveness that makes one sort of captivates one's mind and makes one forget about what it should all be about. It becomes, civilization and social events, education, all these things can become kind of ends in themselves rather than thinking of them all in terms of those are the arenas through which souls manifest their powers, their wisdom, their knowledge, and the means by which they help others to unfold their own inner natures through these various activities. And Maya is something that the Buddhists say is beginningless. It has no beginning. It has no end either, apparently. And it seems to be, so to speak, uncaused. I've never read anything about, well, what is it that produces Maya? Why does it come? We're told that it starts at the beginning of an evolutionary cycle, but why is that? And there doesn't seem to be any explanation other than the fact that it is so.
I had a thought on that. If I may.
Please go ahead, David.
It reminds me a lot. I can't quote it per se, but the idea that any new idea, which will eventually be accepted as greater or higher truth, initially is looked upon, maybe even violently opposed and dismissed. And there's a whole evolutionary process of that new wisdom being adopted. So with these paradigm shifts of greater levels of awareness, I think what the Maya might be is it's the illusion that we're living in currently at this stage of evolution, which is to be demystified at this next level, after the next paradigm. So it might be that, we at least have an awareness that we don't know everything there is to know. We're not fully aware that this evolutionary process is perhaps unending, as you said, and that the illusion that we're living in now, even at our best, might be the Maya, which is then revealed at the next level of awareness, right? The idea that you can't solve a problem at the same level that it was created.
Mm-hmm.
Is that making any kind of sense?
Does to me, David. Yeah, I thought that was a good comment. It made me think that, most spiritual teachers sort of see the beginning gate through which a spiritual aspirant, someone who has spiritual aspirations, that only starts when they are ready to, so to speak, forsake the world and the Maya of the world. So it can only begin when one is penetrated through reason and intuition, experience, through inner wisdom, that this captivating and sort of deceitful glamour to the world and its promises for fulfillment, that it's only when one has begun to turn their back on that and realize that the true self-realization can only come by the path that goes within and above to one's deepest inner nature and not outward, that's where the spiritual path begins. And I think that's pretty much universally true in all spiritual traditions.
John, when you say the path toward the real can begin with us being willing to forsake the world of Maya. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, what you're saying. Is one of the ways that we might do that, other than like giving up house and home and going and living in the forest somewhere. I don't think that's what you're necessarily talking about. So giving up this illusory world that we're living in, could it be something like, for example, not getting caught up in the drama? And I mean, it just seems like sometimes we can especially see it in others, and then sometimes we're also able to see it in ourselves, of just really getting caught up in something that we think is really a big deal, and we're getting, I think, like pulled into the fascination with the drama of it all, where really it's a tempest in a teacup, so to speak. Would that be one way of looking at giving up the Maya of living in the world?
Oh, sure, Renee. And yeah, it's good that you pointed that out, because it's easily misunderstood as being sort of world denying, like you say, retreating to the forest. That's not what we're talking about, really. What we're talking about is forsaking personal enjoyments, personal advancement, personal privileges, those things that have to do really only with our personal nature, our personal selves, and the satisfactions that that self enjoys, the triumphs, the advancements, whether professional or spiritual, turning one's back on that. And the world, think about the worldly evaluations that we give up, the opinions of the world. What does the world hold as exemplary standards? It's all about money and position and power and possessions and fame and recognition and privileges, and you go on, but it all has to do with the things that are really just an extension of personal selfishness. That's what our civilization seems to to exemplify or to hold as the sort of highest level of attainment. But what we're talking about is giving up those standards and adopting standards of true morality, of thinking about actions that benefit not only other people in this civilization, but thinking about the civilizations of the future and the humanity of the future. And what can we do that will benefit those beings who are going to incarnate, well after we're gone. So that's real selflessness, and at least taking a stand in that as as a value.
Yeah, that's very helpful. It's not just a matter of what we don't do or what we stop doing. It's also a matter of what positively do we do. So thinking of generations to come as being way more important than what's going on right now. What are we planting the seeds for in the distant future? That would be a positive step towards this idea of holding the real in our hands, because that has a lot more reality. There's so many more people yet to come into the world than the 7 or 8 billion that we are right now. There's so many more coming along. So that has to be given more reality than especially our own little tiny circle. And our own little tiny self-concerns, and whether we get what we want. Mary, do you have some thoughts you could add in here? What makes sense to you?
Were you calling on me?
Yes, Mary Bird.
Okay, thank you. I'm very confused. A lot of these terminologies I do not understand. I get the general drift, which is wonderful. But what is adamantine compassion?
Oh, okay. Adamantine. It means like the quality of a diamond. Adamantine. It's the quality of a precious jewel. In other words, something that is, so to speak, it's rare. It's not common. It's sparkles like, you know, a jewel or diamond would. It is hard and impervious to, you know, being crushed or, you know, easily destroyed. And it has these qualities of reflecting the light without distortion, so that that kind of compassion is said to be the reflection of the highest principle within man, called buddhi, the principle of universal compassion. And adamantine compassion in the lower nature is like a so to speak, a near perfect reflection of that compassion that exists, you know, at the highest level of human development. So that's a nice question.
Same root word as diamond. Adamantine and diamond are related. Do you not think?
It could be. I could easily solve that question.
That's how I try to remember it. But I don't know if it's true.
It's literally unbreakable. It's a very hard material, adamantine. Brilliant light reflecting and transmitting properties of minerals. Yeah, that's the sense of it, that it reflects and transmits light in a brilliant fashion, and it's difficult. It would be difficult to destroy. It's impervious to the knocks from outside.
Thank you.
Yeah. So what I've been talking about tonight from a theosophical point of view is what could be called objective idealism, just to confuse matters more. And that's a sort of a philosophical term that makes it fit into a whole tradition of idealism. So you have, in philosophy, you have subjective idealism, objective idealism, absolute idealism, transcendental idealism. And there are various schools of Western philosophy that embrace those ideas, but theosophy sort of comes under the head of objective idealism. And what that means is it posits that the spiritual is a reality that exists outside of and independent of human consciousness. It's not something that human beings make up, like a dream or a myth, or I mean, an empty myth, a fairy tale, that it's actual reality and it exists objectively. It's not dependent on whether people believe in it or not. And that's what objective idealism means. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about spiritual values and spiritual influences, that these are realities that human beings in the last couple of centuries have been, well, maybe more, fairly ignorant of, maybe many more centuries than that. But there is, you can tell by looking around, especially with younger people and even at older people who, have begun looking into these matters, that there is a budding interest in spiritual realities and trying to understand what the spiritual nature is in man, what spiritual life is all about, what the spiritual path actually means and what it entails. And we use this phrase quite apart from the traditional religious meanings of, a religious life of maybe taking vows, becoming, undergoing the ceremonies of a church, members of the kinds of things that members of a church do. If you recall, what one of the things that Shankaracharya said was that a human being can do all the ceremonies and rituals for hundreds of eons and not come a step closer to the realization of the divine nature. So that's kind of puts it in perspective, I think.
So sorry, I just need to understand that. And I was into philosophy for a long time, so this is really fascinating. So would you say that the concept of, or like, kind of like the meaning of objective idealist is the belief that the universe is held by ideas and consciousness, and everything is basically moved by the mind and the spirit? Like, is that what he says? Like, is everything is held by ideas and this
Yes.
universal consciousness, and that's
Yes,
the reality, that's the center of reality.
that's exactly right. Yes. And that would be called the noumenal realm rather than the phenomenal realm of effects where everything plays out. So at the noumenal realm, which is the realm of causes, that realm is the realm of ideas. And it's posited there is this divine mind, the mind of the universe. So if you think about it, I mean, I've been reading these ideas in popular mechanics lately. They're talking about how, there could be a mind of the universe, and that human beings are all related to that, and that they somehow draw energy and inspiration from that mind of the universe. Quite amazing concept that, is taking root in just, ordinary magazines like Popular Mechanics. But you're exactly right. That is the idea. And the idea is that it gives sort of priority to the noumenal realm, to the realm of ideas, of universal ideas. And it's Platonic and as well as Neoplatonic, to put it in another perspective. And it has a very long pedigree that going way back into history. So it's something that replicates, in a way, how the universe came into being, that it emerged through the activity of the divine mind, which is said to be not just like consciousness focused just in matter. These are all beings, divine beings of various grades, spiritual beings of every sort, self-conscious beings of many sorts, who collectively make up the manifested, what's called the logos, or the divine mind in manifestation. And that's what propels all of the forms that we recognize in the flora and the fauna of nature, the planets, the harmonious relationships of the planets, and then the universe on a larger scale. All of this is due to the activity of the universal mind, or the divine mind. And it's also held that ordinary human beings can rise to that level of consciousness where they can participate in that work that goes on from no beginning and no end to it. It goes on continuously, ceaselessly, and those beings who are involved in that are self-consciously immortal. They're free from the cycle of birth and death. They don't experience suffering as human beings do because they're freed from the body and its problem, its decay, the lower levels of ideation of the astral light, level of psychic conflict and psychic emotions and turmoil and disease and decaying, psychic corpses, all of that stuff. That they've risen to a level of consciousness above that, where they maintain themselves as self-conscious immortal beings, and that is a destiny which it is possible for any human being to aspire to.
Okay, thank you. Yeah,
Mhm.
so that just made me think real quick that, yeah, maybe Maya is the manifestation, is like the creative manifestation of this consciousness.
Mhm.
But then we get so wrapped out into that Maya, into that illusion,
Right.
into that creation, that we forget, and a divya comes into place where like the ignorance, and we just become so disconnected from
Right.
this consciousness.
That's a very, very clever statement you made, that it is, in fact, a product of, manifestation, and it does play a role. It's something that I think the real problem comes in. It's not necessary that every human being gets caught by Maya and gets suckered into believing this sort of glamour, and gets captivated by it, because there are many beings, it said, who saw it for what it was and just kept on going. Their consciousness kept rising higher and higher, and that they were able to see things from above the realm of Maya. In other words, they saw through it very early on. So they were on a different evolutionary trajectory, so to speak. But large numbers of us got caught by these myopic illusions, and we're still trying to work off the karma of having, succumbed to Maya and avidya many lives ago.
Um, John, I want to thank you for giving us the opportunity, whether or not we all take you up on it, but giving us an opportunity to do a little more breakthrough. that whole state of illusion of Maya that we have surrounded ourselves with.
Mm.
Almost like wrapping ourselves up in it, when what we really want to do is release ourselves from it. And I think challenging our minds, our hearts, our spirits to have the courage to break through it. Something that we don't even usually realize that we're covered. We don't even realize our blindness. We don't realize our ignorance, the fact that we're in darkness. And
can I just say one other thing, Renee? I actually wanted to also add that sometimes these terms like Brahman, ultimate reality, those things really don't ring very authentically. We don't really, just not sure that it has much content, what they mean. So Gandhi used, rather than Brahman, he used the word Sat, or truth. And he thought truth was the highest expression that man could conceive of, and that every human being could well understand being true to himself, to living out whatever truth he saw as part of his deepest nature, and that expanding the truth that he knew and could see within himself was his path of salvation, so to speak. That was his road to Brahman. And Gandhi provides a wonderful example in his writings of someone who is able to take that whole idea of, Sat Chit Ananda and translate it into the sort of the working dictionary of the Karma Yogan, and who worked ceaselessly for the benefit of other human beings.
A great example for us. Yeah. Thank you so much. John, right at the beginning, I didn't introduce you, and I know we're recorded, so I do want to introduce John Powers, who is a nearly lifelong student of the philosophy of Theosophy, who has done innumerable numbers of talks such as these, for which he has devoted immense amount of times, not just in study of books and conversations with others, but I think in doing his best to instantiate these ideas into his own lifetime. And he is the founder of something called Theosophy Trust, which is a website that holds an amazing amount of the world's wisdom held right on one website. And I want to thank him for the countless number of hours and years that he's put into that, and many other endeavors to just make this world a more livable place for us, where we have more access to the wisdom that has been our inheritance for many, many, many eons. And we probably have more access to now than in any known point in human history. Mm-hmm. And thanks to efforts of people like John Powers, it's literally at our fingertips with a keyboard. So I'm immensely grateful to you on many levels for many things that you've done. And I do want to thank you for taking a subject that is really fairly abstruse for most of us and making it much more approachable, right down to your very last example with Mahatma Gandhi. So thank you so much, John. I'll also let you know, everybody, that next week our topic is going to be the final of the yogic paths that we have been studying this year. We have had Karma Yoga and Bhakti Yoga and Jnana Yoga, and we are going to, this next week, take up Buddha Yoga, Path of Compassionate Insight. So that will be very relevant, I think, to Mary's question about adamantine compassion, and John's definition of this aspect of ourselves called buddhi, which is this wisdom compassion. So thank you, everybody, for your attendance, and especially John. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Yes. Aloha. We'll see everybody next week.
Okay.
Mahalo. Aloha.
Aloha, everybody. Bye-bye.